This video is sponsored by Flight Stars, located at Falcon Field in Mesa, Arizona. Hey, fellow aviators, welcome to another Saturday with Safety Chip. Today we're going to talk about stabilized approaches and stabilized approach criteria and what that means to you. There's a lot of confusion, especially in the general aviation community, about how the air carriers view that versus how we see it in general aviation. And really, the concern is how many accidents happen from an unstabilized approach that isn't abandoned by the crew prior to touchdown, if you will. About 68% of all the accidents studied involved, or the approach and landing accidents specifically, involved an unstabilized approach where the crew did not abandon the approach in time. So what is an approach and landing accident? Let's define that. Well, that means the aircraft either landed short of the runway, landed long and had a runway excursion off of the end of the runway, or went off the side of the runway. That's happened all too frequently. A hard landing or a tail strike or a bounce that resulted in either a hard landing or a tail strike. All those are defined by the Flight Safety Foundation, who kind of originated, they did a huge study and originated the stabilized approach criteria that we're going to discuss. So what is that criteria and how do we use it? So there's a list of things that the air carriers in most of the, at least in the Western world, have adopted, and they're almost identical from carrier to carrier with some subtle changes. But generally speaking, the criteria involves a list of things that we have to adhere to or go around. And they include the airspeed should be VREF plus 10 to minus 0, no exceptions. A vertical speed not more than 1,000 feet per minute. The pitch has to be between minus 2 degrees and plus 10 degrees. Bank no more than 7 degrees. The aircraft has to be fully configured for landing. 1 dot of glide slope deviation and 1 dot of lateral deviation. And the power should not be at minimum thrust in a jet aircraft, in a turbine-powered aircraft. And that's because it should be spooled up to the minimum recommended power to aid in the go-around if it's necessary. We'll talk more about that. And the checklists have to be complete. If all those criteria are met, you're on a, quote, stabilized approach. So where do you have to be stabilized? Well, in IMC conditions, the protocol is that by 1,000 feet above field level, you are stabilized. And if not, you have to do something about it. And in VMC conditions, they lower it to 500 feet above field level. And at that point, if you're not stabilized, it's a mandatory go-around. And we call those the gates of the stabilized approach. So why do crews go beyond the 1,000 foot or the 500 foot per minute limit in an unstabilized condition and end up with an incident or accident? Well, one reason is continuation bias. I see the runway, I got to get home. My mission is to land at this airport. Well, your mission is to land at the airport safely, and if you can't do that, obviously we need to go around and do something else. And so that also gets into the concept of get home-itis. Hey, this is the end of the day. I need to go. The car, the bar, whatever is waiting on me, and I need to get this done. Other things are scheduling pressure that may be self-induced, or it may be induced from the organization you work for or your passengers that are on board, and we have to be very careful to guard against that. Anytime we have severe weather in the area, the idea of going around is less attractive. Hey, you just flew through all that convective weather and all that turbulence, and now you were at 500 feet above the ground. The last thing you're going to want to do is go back up into that weather. But that may be the safest option if you're involved in an unstabilized approach scenario. Fatigue is always ever present and could be a factor. So I've had a long day. I just want to get this over with. Very common in long haul operations or many leg operations, like with a regional carrier when you're flying, like I did back in the turboprop days, 7 legs a day sometimes. At that point, it's like I just want to get it over with again for similar reasons to fatigue. There's also the issue of the hierarchy of command. So we might have an experienced captain and a less experienced first officer, for example, and their experience levels are dramatically different. So in one case that we're going to discuss, the first officer may be reluctant to speak up to a very senior or more experienced captain, and that could be a real hindrance to safety in making the decision to say, hey, boss, we're unstabilized. We need to go around. That's a big factor, as you'll see in one of the case studies that we're going to review. CRM in general, I mean, that goes to CRM, can be a factor in limiting the ability of the crew to work together to determine that it's necessary to do a go-around. So when do we go around? Well, we decided anytime we don't meet the stabilized approach criteria, it's a mandatory go-around. Some air carriers vary in this procedure in that at the 1,000-foot gate, some carriers will allow the crew to continue to the 500-foot gate, provided they are fixing what they need to fix. For example, if you're 12 knots fast and at 1,000 feet you identify it, hey, we're fast, I'm correcting it, then you have till the 500-foot gate to correct it. I've seen that in play as well. So let's look at that criteria again. We're talking about basically on course, on glide path, on speed. The checklists are complete. The airplane's configured. No unusual power settings. And we'll talk about that just a little more in a moment. But no unusual power settings and no excessive vertical speed. Many operations will allow you to exceed the 1,000 foot per minute, provided that it's necessary for that approach and you recognize that in advance and brief it. For instance, if it's a steeper than normal approach, you would say, hey, expect 11 or 1,200 feet per minute during your approach briefing. And then as long as you've talked about it and that's what's expected, then it's permissible within reason. Hopefully you don't have to operate in airports like that very often, but there are airports that do require it, of course. Let's talk about that unusual power configuration. If you are coming down the glide path, for example, and we saw this in the incident at Toronto with the regional jet, the CRJ 900, the flying pilot ended up at idle thrust below 500 feet because of increasing performance. So increasing performance is indicative of a wind shear or microburst, and the tendency would be to lower the nose and decrease the power. And then when the performance goes from increasing to decreasing, you're in a world of hurt, especially in a turbine-powered airplane. And the reason is, especially like turbojets, because at the low RPM ranges, these turbine-powered airplanes are very slow to spool up to sufficient power to do a rapid go-around. Most propeller-driven aircraft, because the propeller is moving air over the wing, because the piston engine, for example, is pretty quick to respond, it's easier to do a go-around from idle power, which is why typically in the general aviation environment, you don't see that requirement. But as soon as you move into your jet aircraft, you're going to see how important that is. So remember, the gates are 1,000 feet in IMC and 500 feet in VMC. That's important to remember. And think of the go-around as something we do normally. We don't, but we have to mentally prepare for them and treat it as a normal maneuver. In other words, we have to be proficient at it, and we need to make sure that we're not in the frame of mind where we're doing something wrong or we have to go around. The go-around is a good option in these cases. And we've just seen time and time again the crew continue to push. One of the things that really hinders the decision that we didn't talk about is just breaking out and seeing the runway. Just the fact that you have the runway in sight does not mean you're stable. And also, when the weather's bad, doesn't mean that getting on the ground means you're getting close to the runway means you're stable. Those things just get confused when the crew is in the last seconds of the flight, and hinders their ability to make that decision on the spot to go around. We're going to discuss in the next video the American 1420 accident that occurred in Little Rock, Arkansas, because it's an excellent example of a failure to maintain or comply with the stabilized approach criteria. Lots of other lessons to learn from that accident. You might want to look at the NTSB accident report and get familiar with it. It's a great accident case study for a lot of things, and primarily stabilized approach criteria. So don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and always think safe, act safe, and stay safe. I'm Safety Chip.